you for watching News 101, the news that is interesting, never dumb, and always brings the fun. Tonight we have breaking news that Iceland and Greenland are switching names just to mess with everyone. But back to last week, we were discussing a very trendy video of 3 grandmothers smoking marijuana. We had Alan Chen here to talk about whether that would be considered self-regarding or non-self-regarding vice or virtue. For all who didn't tune in last week, here's a little clip of what we were discussing.
Prismatic, what, BP2, what up Jim Rowe, Jenny, we're gonna let y'all know how these verbal.
We have a special treat for the show this week. Alan's back again along with 3 other guests to have an argumentative discussion in the form of a policy debate about whether or not we should depoliticize universities in America. Tonight's debate will be structured such that each guest will speak twice, once at the beginning for 5 minutes and again at the end for 3. Each of the first 4 speeches will be followed by an opposing side asking a series of questions. And we will start with the affirmative side's argument to depoliticize universities. Now you may ask, what is a policy debate? A policy debate is a debate with one side supporting a change and one side against it, whereas the resolution of the debate leads to a change in policy. Contrary to popular belief, policy debate is, in a sense, a game itself. I remember when I was a kid, I would always play games with my friends. I remember running around the neighborhood asking everyone if they wanted to play hide and seek, and after finding a group, we would eventually play. I'm sure you know how fun hide and seek is to a group of little kids. Looking back, I can ask myself, why were these games so fun? Well, it was because those games took place in a different world, where people would hide in a bounded area and the last person to be found was now it, or the new seeker. These were not rules in real life, but they were here, in this magic circle, as Huizinga would call it, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. This can easily be applied to debating. We have something similar here. These debaters are in a separate world where the outcome of this debate is literally. In the real world, does this really mean much of anything? No, but in this magic circle, it means absolutely everything. Each side is made to believe the world will end if they do not win. So without further ado, let the games begin.
Universities in America are becoming over-politicized and losing focus on the supposed end goal of higher education. At the end of the process, graduates get explored the GPA that professional schools and employers can trust as a measure of intellectual capacity and productive potential. It's important, therefore, that everyone is taking more or less the same test. Because of the increasing integration of politics into higher education, that the end goal has become vaguer. The government is using the universities to achieve targeted outcomes in pursuit of political agenda. Kimball 90. Our most prestigious liberal arts colleges and universities have installed the entire radical menu at the center of their humanities curriculum. This development represents a concerted effort to impact the very foundations of our free society. My aim, he announces, is to expose those recent developments for what they are: ideologically motivated assaults on the intellectual and moral substance of our culture, wielding war images wherever possible. Mexican names as enemies precisely: women's studies, black studies, gay studies, as well as new interpretive studies of semiotics, deconstruction, post-structuralism. Beliefs is their growing dominance and for those who promote them as political causes. Federal and state governments' problems are spilling over to the university and leaving students with that they can't repay. Anderson, 2014. The synergy between federal and state government that propelled the phenomenal expansion of higher education in the 19th and 20th century has always but vanished. Suzanne Mettler writes in her provocative new book, Degrees of Inequality. The Cornell University Political Sciences argues that this drift in public policy over the past quarter century in Washington and the State House has exacerbated gaps between the haves and the have-nots, undermining the idea of college as an engine of upward social mobility. Congressional paralysis takes an especially heavy toll on higher education because colleges and universities cannot grow and prosper without effective federal support. Mettler also critiques a bipartisan alliance in Washington that facilitated the rise of for-profit colleges in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a sector of higher education that has drawn criticism for leaving many students with debts they can't repay. She argues that the industry expansion fueled by federal student aid is a result of misplaced federal priorities. Republicans and some influential Democrats say that for-profit colleges feel a legitimate need. Politics throughout the country spill into higher education curriculum causes the goal of college to be lost. Kimball 90. Various academic interest groups have worked on overturning the curriculum, undermine the traditional intellectual and moral goals of liberal arts education, and transform scholarly language into obscure or unintelligible to students and the educated public. The spirit of 1960s radicalism has installed itself at the center of American colleges and universities through the effort of feminist and neo-Marxist practitioners of deconstruction and other politically motivated groups. Depoliticizing public universities allows for further integration of Menand's Theory 1 into the current public university. This gives individuals who are the most capable the attention, resource, and education they need to propel them into society. Public universities are currently structured so that only those who are deemed with the right intellectual capacity survive. Depoliticizing allows for everyone, regardless of intellect, has an opportunity to prove themselves. Depoliticizing current structures limits the needs to satisfy those needs. Menand 11. College is essentially a four-year intelligence test. Students have to demonstrate intellectual ability over time and across a range of subjects. As an added service, college also sorts people according to aptitude. That professional schools and employers can trust that a measure of intellectual capacity and productive potential is important, therefore, that everyone is taking more or less the same test. An essential argument of the premise is that the welfare of the state justifies everything, and there are different standards of morals for public life and private life for leaders. The affirmative is thinking about the welfare of the state. Because of the United States' current economic standing, depoliticizing university will separate state funding from university, causing states to have more money. Kelly 14. The policies of federal K-12 policies are different for two main reasons. First, federal spending on public K-12 schools is similar. Title I spending equaled about $13.8 billion in 2013 federal loans, grants, and work study added up to $144 billion that year. The financial stakes are higher in higher ed.
Okay, so what do you mean by the depoliticization of the university?
So what we mean is that we'll be withdrawing all connections from the university, like from the government to the university. So withdraw all political connections.
So does that include financial connections too?
Yeah, we won't be taking, like, the university just won't be getting whatever money that the federal government allocates to, like, colleges.
So do you think that certain students might not be able to go to school then that are just as competent
the
as
money
others?
that the government gives directly to the university is not money that we give to students. So, like, financial aid, for example, I mean, financial aid will still exist. It just won't be, like, any ties to a university. So you won't have to specify, for example, what university you go to, or it won't matter what university you go to. But that's more of governmental, like, issues, so we don't really have big control over financial aid. So
Okay, so what about discrimination though? Do you think the students might be discriminated against?
no, I don't believe that, because, for example, like, the universities will avoid any form of discrimination, because, like, for example, like, society has, like, the jurisdiction, which is what Mill said, that society has the jurisdiction over any aspect of human behavior that affects prejudicially the interests of others. So, like, even though, like, the government won't have specific, like, laws and regulations over the university, the laws and regulations that exist, like, in the status quo, for,
So
like,
how
all
will things be
people.
different anyway?
No, for, like, the rules for all people, not specific rules for universities, but, like, laws, like, in general, like, outside the university will still exist. Like, it's not like we'll be, like, saying, like, oh, well, you know,
Then what's different? I guess I just don't really understand what will be different then.
I mean, but, like, there are specific laws that tie to the university, but those laws are not. Though the laws that you're referring to as a discrimination are not ones that are just specifically to universities. So, like, discrimination laws exist, like, outside the university world, which means that, like, you could get in trouble for, like, some type of discriminating, like, at a school or at a restaurant. Like, it's not like a specific university law. So the government doesn't, like, rule over.
For the duration of our speech, we'll outline the problems of the opposing side. We agree that universities establish a leader to tomorrow, but those leaders should be diverse in body and mind. The acquisition of knowledge should be something that's attainable to all people who seek it, Menand 2010. Knowledge is our most important business. The success of almost all of our businesses depend on it, but its value is only economic. The pursuit, production, destination, application, and preservation knowledge are central activities of a civilization. Knowledge is a social memory, a connection to the past. It is a social hope, an investment in the future. The ability to create knowledge and put it to use is an adaptive characteristic of humans. It is how we reproduce ourselves as social beings, and how we change how we keep our feet on the ground and our heads in the cloud. Knowledge is a form of capital that is always unevenly distributed, and people who have more knowledge or greater access to knowledge enjoy advantages over people who have less. This means that knowledge stands in an intimate relation to power. We speak of knowledge for its own sake, but there is nothing that we learn that is not put at a different relation with the world. Usually we hope for a better relation. The first problem of the opposing side is that separating politics from universities means that it's harder to challenge hierarchies that are established within these universities. For example, gender hierarchies in sport. Mika Levack-Manti. The lack of publicity was only a small part of a cluster of policies that limited and shaped women's opportunities to participate in sports, such as for much of the 20th century. In U.S. education, this significantly changed in 1972 with the enactment of Title IX of the Federal Education Amendment, which required the commitment of equal resources to boys and girls sports and education institutions. In fact, it required gender equity and provisions of and access to educational opportunities in general, but both the campaigning that led to the enactment and the continuing controversies of the past decades have kept things focused on sports. Politicization of universities is good. It's allowed for a plethora of opportunities for our country to succeed. James and Ferris Womack. Stimulated by federal incentives such as Land Grants Act and the GI Bill, supported and sustained by investments of the states, the American public universities have evolved into one of the most significant social institutions of contemporary society. Our nation's public colleges and universities have democratized higher education, extending opportunities for college education to all citizens, applying scholarship and research serves the diverse needs of society, and engaging with local communities and regions to provide knowledge and services critical to economic prosperity. The opposing team leads us down a road that only ends in the strong doing what they will and the weak suffering what they must. This is the way of the world. The strong, rich, and powerful can do what they want, while the weak and poor have no choice but to suffer because of it. The negative team thus presents the following: a social contract that continues the politicization of universities in the United States. This social contract will continue to support the status quo. We propose a more mutual responsibility between the university, government, and the student body. For example, if a student would like to attend college but does not have the financial means to do so, even if he or she meets the intellectual standards of the school, he or she should be able to do so. This is the university's responsibility, and loans and other financial support from the government to make that possible. Also, it is impossible to ignore the attendance of colleges inherently submitting to a social contract by enrolling. The students agree to be diligent in his studies if the school provides a good education. This is the basis of political society, and a social contract so the government involvement naturally flows and is beneficial to the students and society because society will obtain more knowledge.
So what exactly is a social contract doing?
The social contract is basically like a mutual agreement between the universities and like the federal government to make sure that every student who wants to go to college should have the opportunity to do so.
Okay, so how is that different from the status quo?
Well, because there's not actually like a social contract per se that like the university or the federal government has this responsibility to make sure that everyone can like go to college or whatnot. So like it will actually be like there is this like responsibility.
So what would this social contract look like?
Well, it would be similar to like the structure of John Locke's like social contract. It's basically like it would just be like a thing like when you apply to college or whatnot, or like when you first start taking those steps to get to college, like you are already basically signing this social contract with the like federal government, with universities that
so
like
there won't
we
be like
are
an
going
actual
to make sure
contract to sign.
No, like a social contract is not an actual like contract.
So this will just be happening while students are preparing to go to college, basically.
Yeah, like
So how is
like,
that different from the status quo? How is that not?
Because there's not like there's nothing or whatnot. There's like no like social contract that says or anything that's like says mentally or like just like assume that
So
like
how
federal
do you-
government or like universities have to do anything.
So
or, like,
how
have
do you
to
make
do
this
anything.
mentally like or like physically happen? Like how is that physically happen?
Well, if need be, like we don't have to actually like specify that like right now. It's just like we just have to argue that it's a good idea that we should have a social contract. But if need be,
So-
there can actually be like a written up contract that like the federal government and universities in the United States say that we have this commitment to the students who want to like receive higher
In the second affirmative speech, we will directly address the issues in the negative speech and provide more in-depth reasons why we should depoliticize universities. The negative team states that separating politics from the university makes it harder to challenge hierarchies that are established within the university. The negative team brings up an example of gender disparity in sports from Mika Levac-Mandy. He states that gender disparity has actually been mitigated through the enactment of Title IX of the Federal Education Amendments. The affirmative team finds fault in this argument. First, we agree that politics has helped lessen the gender disparity in sports in this particular case. But we feel that a politicized education system in college actually contributes to the gender disparity in the first place. Grace Wallach. The relative dearth of female candidates is driven largely by the fact that women are systematically less likely than men to even consider throwing their hats into the ring. This may seem like a fairly straightforward explanation, but the source of the gender gap is anything but simple. Using original survey data, Lawless and Fox find that the difference in men and women begins to diverge early in life, sometime around college. Wallach brings an important point that the gender disparity begins in the college environment. Given that the current system of college is deeply politicized, it would make perfect sense to remove the system so women start off equally to their counterparts in college. The negative team also brings another argument against the depoliticization of universities, saying that politics has allowed for a plethora of opportunities for the country to succeed. Ronald Brownstein, college costs further stratify class privilege. Debt compounds the problem. Stagnant family incomes and rising tuition expenses, driven both by growing costs and shrinking state support for public colleges, have forced students to borrow twice as much annually as a decade ago. Student debt has soared past $1 trillion, outpacing credit card debt, and as the Education Trust notes, low-income students are more likely to borrow and less likely to finish than higher-income classmates. Both the Education Trust and the coalition that formed the 2.0 report would push harder on the lever by more directly tying federal aid to completion rates. Among other things, the coalition proposes to give students bigger Pell Grants if they take more credits, and to allow some states to divert student aid dollars into comprehensive experiments to improve graduation rates. Keynes says such tests eventually could guide federal changes as state-level welfare reforms did in the 1990s. The Education Trust recently issued its most visionary proposal: consolidate virtually all federal student aid beyond Pell Grants into budget-neutral block grants for states that commit to providing debt-free higher education for low-income students and interest-free loans for middle-income students. Participating schools will be required to contain costs and boost graduation. Students will need to maintain steady progress towards completion. It's a powerful conception that both shares responsibility. The sweeping changes these reports envision won't come anytime soon, but like a nation at risk, their message will remain a rickety one until more kids begin the climb to compete it. Edmund Burke. Regulated liberty does not entail equality. Far am I from denying in theory, far my heart from withholding in practice. If I were of power to give or to withhold the real rights in men. In denying their false claims or rights, I do not mean to injure those which are real, and are such as their pretended rights would totally destroy. If civil society be made for the advantage of man, all the advantages for which it has become his right. It is an institution of benefits, and law itself is only benefits of acting by a rule. Men have a right to live by that rule. They have a right to justice, as between their fellows, whether the fellows are in politic function or in ordinary occupation. They have a right to the fruits of their industry, their parents to the nourishment and improvement of their offspring, to instruction in life, and to consolidation in debt. Whatever each man can separately do without trespassing upon others, he has a right to do for himself, and he has a right to a fair portion of all which society, with all its combinations of skill and force, can do in his favor. In this partnership, all men have equal rights, but not to equal things. He that has but 5 shillings in the partnership has as good as a right to it as he that has 500 pounds as to his larger proportion. But he has not a right to an equal dividend in the product of the joint stock, and as to the share of power, authority, and direction which each individual ought to have in the management of the state, that I must deny to be amongst the direct original rights of man in civil society. For I have in my contemplation the civil social man and no other. It is a thing to be set
Okay,
up by...
so once again, what does it mean to like depoliticize the university?
So, as our partner stated in her cross-ex, it's to depoliticize universities to remove political activity or any political influence.
Okay, so how do you actually do that?
The first step is removing connections from the public university and the government.
Okay, so like, how do you remove these actual like ties?
So,
to, like,
for example, my partner brought up a point about funding. Like funding from the government, direct funding from the government for
Okay,
education.
so I'm just not understanding. Okay, so what's the purpose of the plan? Like, what does this actually do?
It stops the government from creating social agendas through, like colleges, through university, well, political agendas through like university.
So wouldn't that like inevitably happen because of the fact that people have their own personal opinions, their own like agenda? So how would you actually stop people or like professors or like the university from pushing their own political agendas?
So in my affirmative statement, I stated that there was a specific speaker that said that the disparity between men and women, a point that you raised in your negative speech, that the disparity between genders were prominently displayed in Mika Levesque's article. In my affirmative statement, I said that one of the authors of an article said that the disparity began in college. And so by depoliticizing college, you remove that disparity to begin with.
So how does depoliticizing college move that disparity when we live in like a patriarchal society? How does that change the way that society is like naturally set
It's
up?
a first step to change. We're not saying it's going to change like that fast and it's going to happen like all over. But we're saying like the first step in changing it is by removing all political ties from the university. Like, so let me say university.
And like
So
you said,
just removing like political ties, that just automatically increases the amount of like women who like go to college or like get accepted to like these colleges and like
not necessarily, but by taking the first initiative, we start the process of
That happening.
that happening.
I'll be expanding on the counter plan that Christine brought up involving a social contract. This involves politicization of the university, which means that while sticking pretty close to the status quo, we propose more of a mutual responsibility between the university, government, and the student body. For example, if a student would like to attend college but does not have the financial means to do so, even if he or she meets the intellectual standards of the school, he or she should be able to do so. This is the university's responsibility, and loans and other financial support from the government make that possible. Also, it is impossible to ignore that the attendance of college is inherently submitting to a social contract. By enrolling, the student agrees to be diligent in his or her studies if the school provides good education. This is the basis of the political society, a social contract. So government involvement naturally follows and is beneficial to the student and society because it will obtain more knowledgeable citizens. John Locke, 1690. And thus that which begins and actually constitutes any political society is nothing but the consent of any number of freemen capable of a majority to unite and incorporate into such a society. And this is that, and that only, which did or could give beginning to any lawful government in the world. Nobody doubts but an express consent of any man entering into any society makes him a perfect member of that society, a subject of that government. Every man that hath any possessions or enjoyment of any part of the dominions of any government doth thereby give his tacit consent, and is as far forth obliged to obedience to the laws of that government. Another reason that the social contract theory is a good way to continue politicization in the university is that universities are responsible to their students to provide a good education regardless of financial ability to pay or race. Additionally, without government involvement in colleges, they may be free to discriminate against students at will. Without politicization, the social contract theory would not be able to be applied because all students might not be offered a fair chance at an education despite their ability to learn and succeed in the classroom as well as the real world. Racism and discrimination regarding financial status would ensue. Rothstein, 2014. In recent years, Supreme Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been one of the few leading public figures on or off the court, unabashedly willing to challenge Roberts' colorblindness. Quote, only an ostrich could regard the supposedly neutral alternatives as race unconscious, Ginsburg has said, and only a contorted legal mind could conclude that an admissions plan designed to produce racial diversity is not race conscious. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race, and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate events of centuries of racial discrimination. This is implemented when people are applying to colleges. They want to be able to go to college, but can only do so if they have a fair shot and good admission practices. Without government involvement and laws made by the government, discrimination would surely occur, and we might see education going into the past. Segregated schools could become a reality because there would be no consequences for colleges. Today, schools are responsible to the law of the land and to the Constitution to follow the rules our country has created to ensure that education is fair in admissions and what goes on at school. With the depoliticization of colleges, the colleges themselves might become political in the most discriminatory and arbitrary way.
So, explain to me again your counter-proposal about the social contract and the status quo that you mentioned in your negative statement.
The social contract is pretty much similar to the status quo, but it's more responsibility.
Can you identify what the status quo is?
That's when students are accepted into college, they're submitting to a social contract that they agree if they're allowed to go to this school, that they'll work just as hard as the university will work for them.
Okay, and can you answer the previous question about elaboration on your social contract?
Well, that's inherently a social contract because by submitting to the rules of the university also has responsibilities to the student that it must uphold.
So, can you explain some of the points in your counter proposal that you believe is a better fit than depoliticizing the university?
Well, continuing government funding is really important because that's part of the school's responsibility is to provide an education for all students who want to go there and learn.
So, some people may receive no funding at all because of racial or ethnic disparities. Do you think that contributes to some of the
No, I think that would happen if you depoliticize the university.
So do you think it would be more effective to do this, to increase government funding over cutting ties with the government?
I'm not even saying increase government funding, I'm saying keep it the same. Or increase would be better than depoliticizing it at all.
Well, in my opinion, it looks like the depoliticization of public schools would be a very beneficial thing. Well, let's see how this debate ends.
There are a few things that are inherently wrong with the plan. One being it's not feasible. There's no possible way to depoliticize the university. Secondly, just because you remove federal government ties doesn't mean you depoliticize the university. People are naturally political. So it's inevitable that political ideologies will be integrated into the way that societies are set up. Third, also the affirmative leads to an increase in discrimination. The removal of federal funding means universities need to look elsewhere for that money, meaning that students who can pay for tuition without aid will more likely get accepted, which leads to an decrease in minorities attending because a large percentage of minorities are from lower class backgrounds. Menand states that knowledge is a form of capital that is always unevenly distributed, and people who have more knowledge or greater access to knowledge enjoy advantages over people who have less. If people who are from higher backgrounds get accepted to universities, there will be a higher class gap. It will cause people to not have the same opportunities to be accepted to universities and be able to attend and be able to afford to go to these colleges. Furthermore, universities are still patriarchal, and that is beginning to change due to political agendas being pushing for gender equality. Without the push for federal government politics, there's not an incentive for those patriarchal societies to change. The example Mika Lebanti gives is of Title IX of the Federal Government Education Amendment. Furthermore, politicization of universities is good. It's allowed for opportunities for this country to succeed in terms of engaging with local communities and to provide knowledge and services critical to economic prosperity, public health, and national security, and also increasing the economy. And there's no incentive to voting for the affirmative plan to depoliticize university, a plan in which is not even feasible. There's no possible way that it could actually happen.
The first step to the plan is removing funding, which was stated earlier in our speeches. That will happen through a series of meetings with the government initially, but as we said before, Bert talks about how a gradual change is the best change. Fast revolution isn't key. So the key to creating real change and a sufficient outcome is by slowly creating this change, so it won't happen immediately. Also, the government doesn't determine who is accepted into college, the admissions officers do. So removing the political ties from the government won't cause for more discrimination, because the way that students are accepted into college is the exact same way that they'll be accepted into college now. The only difference will be that we, financial aid, you won't have to specify what college you're going to. So addressing the funding part of this argument, the only portion of funding that comes from the government directly to the universities comes from it's really not that big of an amount. Most of the money comes from local hospitals, athletics, tuition, endowments, and some tax money. This doesn't mean that students are not allowed to get financial aid. It just means that they will not be attachment to the university. You can apply for financial aid and use your money to pay for college. How you pay for college is not our concern. Our concern is how the government is using universities to create political agendas. Since removing funding from the government will allow the government to have more money, which they can allocate to more important things like K-12 education, which will better prepare students for higher education, which means that there will be more students going to college actually. Which will also address the Mills theory, because more students will be have the intellectual capacity to attend college when they have a better K-12 education. Also, addressing the social contract argument, Mill attempts to delineate when the authority of society can rightly limit individuality and the sovereignty of the individual over himself. Mill's answer is that society and the individual should receive control over that part of human life that is particularly interested in, which means that this is how the university will avoid any forms of discrimination. This is actually already happening within society itself, because people have human behavior, you won't do anything that will harm yourself to other people. And in contrast, if an action only indirectly affects society without violating any fixed obligation, then what Mill says, the inconvenience is one which society can afford to bear, which means that it won't be something that's a crime or will be detrimental to society by depoliticizing the university. It will only benefit the state and benefit the government, which they will actually more, which is the more reason why you should vote for affirmative, because we are better for the government, better for the university.
The affirmative plan is, in effect, asking you to vote to rewind in time. It's asking to go to a time in which the government could not and did not intervene in the unfair practices of establishments, schools, and any other facility. If you vote for the AF, funding will be removed that the government gives to underprivileged but competent nonetheless students. These students desire to participate in a social contract. They agree to work hard and study if the government and university together provide the means for them to do so. This is in keeping with John Locke's social contract theory, the very theory that the Constitution of our country is based on. What that really looks like is this. Students apply to the university that they would like to attend, and by doing so, they're inherently submitting to that social contract. They will abide by the rules, regulations, and duties the school places on them as students. They will attend class and study hard. The university, in turn, is responsible for making sure that the competent students, the ones who are committed to bettering their positions in life and the world, are given a fair shot at succeeding. The government helps the university to achieve this through funding, in the form of state funds and financial aid. It even helps to dole out loans to those who need them. This is the responsibility of the government to its society and citizens. There is simply no way that the government could be removed from its involvement in the university. There is a symbiotic relationship between students and the higher power, in the form of the school and the government. There cannot be a social contract without any one of these participants. Our government has had its flaws, but it has, over time, been a democracy through and through. Universities may abuse their powers without government intervention. The affirmative discusses political agenda that's pushed on students through the university in the current system of government involvement. We argue that professors will always believe what they will and may discuss certain political ideas in a biased attitude. Without government intervention and connections, though, the university could become whatever it wanted to be. It could discriminate and even brainwash students, since it's basically a separate entity altogether. While the opposition mentions that Burke says change needs to be gradual, it also states that separation from the government needs to happen all at once. This is a contradiction in and of itself. The current system has its flaws. We're not denying that, but separation from the government won't fix any of them. The only thing that will practically work and still provide a good amount of students with an education is to continue on with the status quo and stress the importance of keeping a social contract where students are responsible to the university and the government and vice versa. Removing the government, although the opposition was unclear about how to do this, is simply impractical, and it opens up the door to future discrimination and elitism in universities. The rich would be the only ones attending an apparently unbiased university, although we have no idea what disenfranchisement from the government would actually look like in modern-day society.
In our report, we want to address some of the issues that the negative team brings to the table before we explain why the depoliticization of universities are a better solution. We believe that there is no real reason to remove completely the political nature of public universities, but as a first step, by depoliticizing and removing ties with the government, we take the first initiative to cut ties. And we understand that politics exists naturally in all forms, and we can't fully depoliticize, but saying that depoliticize actually contributes to more discrimination is incorrect. In my affirmative statement, I have a author, Grace Wallach, who states that the relative discrimination between male and females begin in college, and the fact that we are depoliticizing universities makes the first step in reducing this gender equality. And basically, the negatives team point about gender disparities in Miga's Levesque article makes no sense at all, because this point about how gender inequality begins in college makes no sense. Another point that the negative team makes is that they propose a status quo or a social contract, and we don't see any possible new initiative that's being brought up. They say that they want to maintain the status quo, which makes no initiative for any change whatsoever. It just continues what the current system has set up. And we know from what the affirmative team has addressed, there are significant problems with that. You have gender disparities and other issues at hand. So by sticking with the status quo, you maintain the same disparity, you maintain the same gender inequality, same discrimination. So by voting for the affirmative, you vote in the right direction of change. By voting for the negative, you vote for what is currently being employed, and that makes no sense whatsoever. On that belief, we think you should vote the affirmative.
That was our debate, and I hope you enjoyed it. What do you think? Check out the survey in the link below and let us know who you think. We have breaking news from the News 101 news desk. 100 brains have been lost or stolen from the University of Texas. And in other news, 57,466 are still missing from the Ohio State University. But thanks for watching, and good night from the News 101 news team. Stay classy, Ann Arbor. This policy debate will be structured so that each person can speak twice. Each in the beginning of each piece. Fuck. Tonight's said that over again, I bet.
No, there's just something playing through my head and I can't get it out of my system. Have you watched a video of the three grandmas smoking pot and then they're playing?
I haven't seen that yet.
No, literally, like it's been just. I can imagine my grandma smoking pot and then playing Cards of Humanity against humanity with me. I'm sorry.
Is this recording right now?
Right? That would be so funny.
Okay.
Mika would be like,
Hey, wait, isn't that an evidence of self-regard?
Okay. Are you ready? Alan, dude.
Alright,
Just go, like, just start, and then like, okay, 1, 2, ready, go.
right, like,
the one is Mika.
Oh yeah, it was
Miki Lavec Menti.
it's just Mika, like.
I don't know. I spelled
It's M-I-C-K-A or M-I-K-A?
I spelled it in my KK.
That's Miki.
I don't know. I put that. But
Miki.
First question, because I usually just build off that first question. You're just not still recording, right? Please explain in further detail why you think that our affirmative is not going to work, or not substantial to be efficient enough.
I don't think it's going to work because I think it's just going to widen the inequality gap and not allow people who actually want to go to school to go. Like, there are a lot of privileged kids that go to school just because that's the thing they're supposed to do, and people who really want to go to school very badly aren't allowed to.
Are you saying that politics is the reason why some people with not enough the environmental conditions to go to school, so they don't have enough funds to
Not
go?
politics, but the government.
The government. So is the government a form of, because you're saying that the reason why some people can't go to school is because of the government, and the government
it's because of the affirmatives plan of not allowing the government to be involved.
Can you repeat some of the conditions that might improve because of a political system that has been eradicated?
I can't think of any. I think that so many people wouldn't be allowed to go to school. I think that the affirmative undermines the amount of power and influence government has over universities, and it underestimates the massive, horrible backlash that will happen if they're not involved in them anymore.